Welcome, everybody. I'm Rania. I work with Randall here at the BrainTRUST Institute, Professional Institute. And this is our second AI pop-up backed by popular demand. And we hope to keep doing more of these on different topics. So the idea of hosting this AI theme sort of pop-up get-together for leaders really came out of our clients sort of not bringing up AI to us and not sort of us sort of observing within the organizations. They weren't sort of seeing the risks and opportunities. In terms of training, policy, strategy, we were sort of holding their hand to help them tackle the topics. And since Randall is a master at creating resources for his clients and colleagues in leadership positions, here we are to talk about AI. And we're going to share with you here, we're going to answer your questions. We're going to hear from Randall, but we're also going to talk about what we are doing within Pine Tree Advisors with Randall's clients and within the BrainTRUST Professional Institute, how we're tackling the AI issues. And we're going to share some resources with you. For those who know Randall and might not know Randall, I'll share a little bit about him. He has founded several successful startups. He held a long-term position at a Big Four consulting firm and was a senior executive for an American public company. He's still speaking for groups. He's still doing one-on-one growth leadership for CEOs and founders. And he works with me at the BrainTRUST Professional Institute to develop timely courses for leadership, such as our AI course. And he's written his 8 books, and he's in the Speaker Hall of Fame, and we can go on and on with his bio. But we're going to get on with hearing from Randall about AI, sort of how he sees the lay of the land here, and then we'll get to your questions. Super. Oh, and if you like this format, I'll just add that our next one is going to be November 15th on business growth, digital strategy. So if you want to get an invite to that, make a note in the chat or send me an email. I'm happy to get you on our list for our upcoming free events. Wonderful. Over to you, Randall.
Wonderful. So this is not too different from my experience. A lot of people are saying, well, I got to just sort of figure it out, and I've got to understand what it is. So you know what? Maybe I should go to OpenAI, or you could try some of the other tools as well, and try it. And experimenting is very good. There's a huge amount of focus right now exclusively on how do we improve workflows? How do we actually be faster doing whatever we're doing, or maybe a little bit better? And there's almost zero question outside of the tech space about how do we use AI to actually change our business model. And so, since most of the people are kind of just starting to experiment on it, I'll sort of key that a little bit. But I have to tell you the whole question of, gee, how might it impact your business model is front and center. So I think that not everybody understands, how large language models work. And when I say ChatGPT, I'm also talking about Bard and Claude and a lot of these other ones that exist that might not have as much time or press space, if you will. But the way they work is actually kind of the way our brain works. And I'm saying this just to, when we talk about risks later or answer questions about other questions that you have, you might sort of understand why there's certain challenges with it or how to take advantage of it. If you think about an infant, for example, when they're out of the womb, they don't know anything. And they get all kinds of little bits of information. They observe things. Eventually, we learn to read and watch TV and consume other things. And all these little bits and pieces go into our brain. And once they're in our brain, we kind of make connections with it. That's kind of the way these large language models work. They ingest absolutely huge amounts of data, often scraped from the internet. In fact, there's a number of large data sets where that's true. They also scrape data, by the way, from the prompts that people actually type into the system as well. So they've got all of this. And then there's an algorithm that essentially says, aha, let's just see how this all might be related somehow. And so when we ask a question, when a prompt, or we set up a series of prompts, what ends up happening, is the system says, aha, what's the most likely word that I should sort of respond with? And then what's the next likely word that should come after that? And the next likely word to come after that, and the next likely word to come after that. I'm simplifying a little bit, but effectively that's how ChatGPT and all these other large language models work. Whether it's images or whether it's sounds or whether it's words, etc. It's a probability type model. And as that algorithm sort of it gets better, and as the underlying data gets better. And as what we put into these models through our prompts gets better, okay, the results get better. So that's kind of the overview, just in case you weren't aware of actually how these things actually came to be. And all these competitors like Bard or Microsoft Copilot or Claude or the others, they have different data sets that it's based under. They've got different algorithms, right? And we could put the same things. That's why you get different kind of answers if you actually experiment with some of them as well. What I wanted to share with you is a particular model that we can use when it comes to using it for our businesses on a tactical perspective. Now, there may be some people, because I obviously don't know everybody who's on the call, whose business is software development or SaaS platforms, and you're probably very, very deep into, oh, how do we enmesh right into our software AI capability? And, in a certain sense, it's kind of like electricity. There's AI that's either in or about to be in, or they're planning to be in almost every piece of technology that's out there, right? So if that's the kind of business that you have, I expect that you're very, very much into it already. And if you subscribe to one of a million different platforms already, you're probably seeing bits of AI that are part of it. Sometimes it's just a computer API connection to the big platforms like OpenAI or any of the other ones, for example. But sometimes they've got their own language model and they've got their own algorithms, et cetera. It doesn't matter. As a user, the question is, well, how in the world should we be using this? And how can we do it rather than just, experimenting and possibly wasting time and effort? How do we decide where and how to do that? And I wanted to share a marketing model. And I understand, AI can be used for supply chain optimization. It can be used for doing financial analysis. It could be used for a whole bunch of things. But I'll just take this one for the time being. And let me just make sure I can share it. I'm going to share something that we call a trust curve. And you'll see it on your screen in just a minute or two. But essentially, the trust curve says that between the point of nobody knows who the heck you are and somebody has made a commitment, for example, purchasing a product or service, signing a contract, or deciding to work with you, people go through particular stages. Businesses go through particular stages. They go through 4 stages, in fact: awareness, preference, trial, and commitment. And at each one of these stages, things have to happen. You have to let people know about you. They have to be aware of you. They have to prefer you over alternatives. They have to sort of test drive you. That's trial. And then afterwards, they've got to commit. And if you think about all the decisions that a business or any kind of buyer has to go through in order to do something, they have to go through the awareness, preference, trial, commitment, the trust curve stages. So I'm putting up a graphic right now that shows what it looks like. And you can see awareness, preference, trial, commitment along the bottom. It's sort of a little arrow there. But I wanted to point out these circles here. They say tofu content, mofu content, bofu content, and client content. Now, yeah, tofu is a delicious vegetarian delight. That's not what I'm talking about here. These refer to top of funnel, middle of funnel, bottom of funnel, or client content. And the idea is that throughout each of the stages of the trust curve, there's different types of content and different types of marketing initiatives and process initiatives that will help move people up to the next one. And the fundamental question about how, as an organization, you can use AI to grow or build engagement or whatever it happens to be is to say, how can AI specifically be used for awareness? How can it be used for preference? How can it be used for trial or content, right? And then you say, okay, well, Randall, how? Well, part of it is to look at the content that you create. So a lot of organizations, for example, pump out a lot of content, whether it's blog posts or white papers or whatever. Artificial intelligence and large language models like ChatGPT can be used to ideate. What are the ideas we might want to write about, okay, or explore about? It can be used to actually write the outline of a particular article. Give me the 5 most important issues having to do with such and such from the perspective of such and such. It could be used to actually doing the writing of that actual article. It could be used for the editing of the article itself. Rewrite what I just put in, but from the perspective of this or from the perspective of that, or condense it by 20%, or make it more understandable by a grade 6 or grade 5 or university level reader. So it can be used to actually create the content at each of the different stages. And so right now, there's a lot of experimentation with respect to the prompt strategy. What are the questions should we ask? How do we set up something? I'm saying that probably before you do that, the question is figuring out where on the trust curve that content that you're going to create actually should set. So top of funnel content and middle of funnel content, it might be that information-oriented stuff. But bottom of funnel content, the stuff that might induce trial might be things like an assessment or an audit or a checklist that somebody can use to see, in fact, whether something makes sense for them, particular service or product. Gee, do I really need to fill in the blank? And ChatGPT can be used with the appropriate prompts to come up with what those things actually are. Now, just because it comes out of the system doesn't mean it's right. And I'm sure there'll be some questions on risk that I'd be happy to sort of explore that a little bit later. But the question of how it ends up going from a content perspective in each, that's kind of the model. From a process perspective, there's pretty much every single process that a business has, okay, whether it's a business development process or a delivery process or a supply chain, a procurement type process, AI can be involved in that at the very same in the very same way. Putting together an RFP for example, what should be in an RFP, what could be, right? How do we make it more understandable? With respect to HR and hiring, it's the same thing. Of all the following resumes, which ones have blah blah blah? What are the kinds of questions that we might ask somebody in a particular type of situation? There's an awful lot from a process. If you've got a process, you can say, okay, how can AI help speed it along or change it itself? So let me just stop for a moment and see if there's any questions with respect to what I've been talking about so far.
About using AI for writing an article, how to avoid the risk of plagiarism or copyright infringement. Very good question. And if I type in, give me 10 ideas to increase sales, various sites will be scraped. And I don't know if the 10 tactics are verbatim from a document created by another competitor.
Okay, so there's an awful lot there. So number one, there's the issue of there's every single one of these platforms out there, they actually do scrape stuff from the internet. And therefore, stuff that's on the internet, which might be copyright somebody else, yes, there's this risk when you actually ask ChatGPT to do something. Now, Microsoft just recently, several weeks ago, and I think Google has just recently said, hey, we will protect you if somebody comes after you for copyright infringement, which is very good. That hasn't been tested yet, and there's a fair amount of fine print, but still. In your prompt, one of the things you can say is to ask it for source attribution, right? You can use plugins. Oh, somebody actually said this. Plugins are helpful too. ChatGPT, including Scholar AI, is a way to add in references. Yes. So what you can do is you can actually ask it for the references or use plugins to do that. The other thing that you can do is you can critically look at the output from ChatGPT itself and say, okay, is this actually stuff that we would say, right? And you say, well, yes, but that doesn't deal with the issue of infringement or using somebody else's ideas and everything. But that's kind of where Google can come in too. So you can actually do a bit of a fact check from Google to say, okay, where else is this referenced on the internet? And if you do that, that'll reduce the risk partially. That'll also, thank you very much, help you if it is somewhere, give attribution. Victor Hugo said in Les Miserables, there's only so many stories that have ever been told, right? And so very often ideas are available in various other places, but still, what was the second part of that question, Rania? I'm sorry, I just didn't
No,
write.
it's a big meaty question about attribution. And then if I type in, give me 10 ideas to increase sales, various sites will be scraped. And I don't know if the 10 tactics are verbatim from the document. I think you addressed it.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. Okay. Oh, can
He
we
has
provide...
same person has another question, very good question. On the point of language learning, is it possible that a flash mob of people, I love this term he used, pardon me, letting people in, can influence the output of AI? For example, if everyone on this call were to type into the browser that GM is solely responsible for global warming, will this impact the output?
Okay, so when you've got like hundreds of millions or billions of data points that are scraped into, it's very, very hard to actually influence it in a certain way. But actually, this is a huge, huge problem with respect to the problem of bias and implicit bias specifically. I wish I could say that the internet was fully had no bias whatsoever, but it's biased towards people who are tech, male, slightly younger, white. I mean, there's so many different biases that are built into the data that's scraped. How do you know that if you're relying exclusively on the output, that what is there is reflective of both your voice, but also of what your objective is in terms of how you might be using it to communicate? Like this is a very, very big thing. So no, we can't sort of, if we have the movement of destabilizing whatever, it's very, very unlikely. It's very, very unlikely. There's also guardrails that most of these platforms have put in place to make sure that some of the outputs are not egregiously bad. And we've seen some early cases where some of the guardrails are not there. Of course, people will argue that while putting in guardrails also influences and it puts bias into whatever the results are. But it's a question. With respect to the I say something on the chat, short list of suggested AI sites to be used for business. If I send, here's the list of the 5 best today. In 3 weeks from now, I'd say, oh, by the way, here's the best. And by the way, of some of the ones that were the best, all of a sudden, some of them have a bigger price tag. And gee, some of them, for example, have updated and some of them have not updated. The best is actually just to go on Google and do a search. There's all kinds of different lists of everything. For video, you could use AI for this. For programming and coding, here's some tools. More or less, as I said before, it's becoming like electricity and it's being embedded into just about everything. Microsoft is testing for their enterprise customers right now. Significant AI implementation of within Office. Okay, not for the regular people, but certainly for some of the enterprise clients. Pretty much every coding platform is doing stuff. When it comes to writing and editing, there's been tools like Jasper that's been around for a long time. Absolutely, the tools from Anthropic and Stability and OpenAI and Google, like these are some of the names, if you will, that if you go to their sites, you can say, okay, let me just try that. I'd also say, when everyone answers at the very beginning, hey, so I'm a lot of people are saying, well, I'm experimenting. I think that this is very good because by experimenting, you're kind of on the forefront of bringing organizational learning into your organization, into your company, your association, your not-for-profit, and that's very helpful. But there's a certain sort of point where we stop with this cowboy experimentation and do what I call controlled experiments. Okay, we've got a business objective of doing such and such, or we've got a workflow or a process or a client journey, whatever it happens to be, and we want to use AI to do such and such. And the controlled experiment is to say, okay, let's experiment on solving this particular problem rather than let's go on an experimentation thing. Remember when the internet actually was first started and everyone was browsing just to discover what was there? And at a certain point, we all sort of woke up and said, well, one second, the day job didn't go away. What we really need to do is we need to be a little bit more controlled about how we experiment with the tool. It's the very same thing with AI. So if you've been experimenting a little while and you think there's something there, flip it around and say, what's the problem we want to solve here? And let me do a whole bunch of experiments around that particular problem. When that problem's solved, experiment on something else, but doing this controlled experiment rather than just way, way open. If you haven't done anything yet, do some cowboy experimenting. Just get familiar with the tools, right? But we have to remember, just like, the internet and then eventually social media, these are all shiny objects, right? And it's good to learn about them, but it's also good to actually do the day job.
Here, the government recently endorsed a voluntary code for responsible AI through self-regulation. And at the same time, there is regulation making its way through Parliament and consultations ongoing towards regulation. Is self-regulation the way to go? Should Canada aim for a regulatory regime similar to Singapore, for example, that reduces risks to developing AI in Canada? What is required for the industry to thrive in Canada? Okay, a big meaty question. Randall, the politician, is going to answer.
So thank you very much for that. So much of the focus that we spend our time on is really helping our clients' businesses sort of figure this kind of stuff out. This is the other side, which is the regulatory side. And certainly in Canada, actually governments everywhere are trying to figure out how do we get our minds around this from a regulatory perspective. In the United States, for example, their code of conduct for all the big platforms is the usual kind of stuff, and they're, the big platforms are signing on to it, and that's all good. And then one of their senators came out with something called their Safe Innovation Framework, which is all focused on national security and accountability and innovation to keep America in the forefront. Singapore is got one as well, which they've got about a dozen different attributes and some framework and software and questions around that. In Canada, we've got Bill C-27, the Digital Charter Implementation Act, and there's also an Artificial Intelligence and Data Act, AIDA, that's coming down the pike. And these things deal with stuff, and just to put everyone on the same page a little bit, is accountability and data rights, ethical development and usage. One of the reasons why so many governments are sort of getting around this is because the whole privacy and data security questions sort of were kind of forgotten when social media came about. Like, who owns the data that we each have, and what privacy rights do we actually have as individuals, and what obligations do organizations have with respect to the privacy rights and the data as well. And figuring out these kinds of things are pretty important. I think I think self-regulation is a very good step, because it means that there's conversations that happen. But there's a lot of very different interests. So, for example, some of the platforms that might want to use the data that people put out there, if you will, for their own purposes, to create their own IP that then gets repurposed another way. I don't think it's completely clear. I don't think it's completely clear right now as to, well, who owns the resultant IP. There's so many conversations that are actually happening on that. And I think that there will be regulation in the same way that there's trademark and copyright and global IP, but it's not there yet. Partially because different countries have taken a different approach, and partially because the issues haven't been explored. So once there's regulation, whether it's in what we're doing at C-27 in Canada or in Singapore or in the EU or the United States or any of these other countries, at that point they'll be tested in the courts. Okay, and there'll be more conversations about it as well. Interestingly, the CEO of OpenAI has been very, very much a proponent of AI regulation, because he feels that it's not fair, if you will. It's not appropriate to have it being a black box where effectively all of us and our data, either individually or corporately, is the raw material for somebody else's for somebody else's business without our full knowledge and explicit permission. The question about is self-regulation right, or even the question of government regulation right. The problem is that there's always bad actors. And if we had a self-regulatory regime, where's the teeth and where's the monitoring? And gee, what happens if a bad actor, or maybe just an ignorant actor, you know, a bunch of coders who decided to do something, but they weren't aware fully about what their requirements were? That'll escape the self-regulatory sort of nice to have. So until the government regulations are in place, I think there should be self-regulation, but that's just a step. Once the government regulations are in place and they're tested and everything, and presumably there's teeth to it and there's monitoring and compliance testing and the whole bit, then there's the question of bad state actors. You know, there's a number of countries around the world right now that don't exactly follow some of the guidelines that exist in other fields. For example, you know, DNA, changing of DNA or you know, human DNA, for example, is if you're cloning or a bunch of other things. So what do you do about the bad actors? And if there's a bad actor organization, they'll just find a place in the world that it's not. So I think that yes, regulation is fine. And in fact, it's necessary for the protection and for making a level playing field for everyone in the space. But I also think that there needs to be a huge amount of general public education about the issues surrounding security, privacy, uses of AI, unsuspecting uses of AI, so that individuals are, you know, it's caveat emptor in a certain sense. Individuals and leaders need to do this. I'll just also say one other thing. Certainly at a corporate governance perspective, you know, boards right now have always been considering, you know, how to grow the organization, and gee, there's more than just one stakeholder involved, not just the shareholder. But I think the whole question about data privacy and data governance and data security and you know, wherefore art thou AI in all of this is becoming even more important. And certainly it's a conversation I've had around the board table as well. So that was a meaty question. Let me just ask, that came from Evelyn Dempsey. Is there anything that you wanted to add or ask for clarification? If you'd like to take yourself off of mute, Evelyn.
Hi, Randall. Yeah, good to see you again. No, I think you handled it very well, really, in the context. I was also curious to hear what other people might have to say on the subject of self-regulation, but I think your answer is quite appropriate and very practical. So thank you for that.
Does ChatGPT written content affect SEO?
Huh. Oh my God, SEO. Oh, what's that? The answer is of course it affects SEO. Anything that you write about and how it's done is so. There's two things, okay, that I think are relevant here. Number one is there's something called the Google duplicate content penalty. So when there's identical content that appears in multiple places, they both kind of get penalized in terms of search engine ranking. And so if there's a lot of people using the same output from ChatGPT in their content that appears, I think that there's a risk of having that duplicate content penalty. I think probably more importantly is Google and Bing and anyone else out there. They're not stupid, and the last thing that they really want is to have generative AI content flooding the internet and devaluing the value of the real information that's on there. So they're also building into their algorithms things that will cancel, if you will, the ranking of ChatGPT or any large language model content. I also think that we're into, you know, when marketers send emails, spam, I should say, when spam is actually sent, and then the platforms have, well, we're gonna have junk mail filters that'll filter out that spam, and it becomes this like cops and robbers kind of thing that goes back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. You know, people will figure out ways through clever use of their prompt strategy to come up with more and more original stuff. right? And they'll spin that out, and Google and Bing and all these other places are going to be tightening and tightening and tightening the screws, and we're going to have the same cops and robbers that are there. I think one of the things that is very difficult, though, is the question of, well, if you're posting a lot of ChatGPT oriented content or some ChatGPT oriented content, will Google and the other search engines decide that they're going to penalize everything from a particular domain that comes from there just because a certain percentage of it is ChatGPT generated? I think that's an upcoming issue. That being said, there's no reason, and I mentioned this before, that you can't use these kinds of tools to ideate topics or to come up with potential points. And that might be a huge workflow improvement for anybody who's doing any writing or editing, so that you can actually put your unique organizational or personal spin on whatever it is and then post it up. One of the things that we're playing with, by the way, is to actually label the content that we actually produce as being generated by ChatGPT or generated by any AI, or where AI was used as in part of the creation process, or whether it has 0% output. So I've got some 600 articles that are on the randallcraig.com site. Not a one of them is ChatGPT. We've got about, I don't know, 50, 75, that are sort of scheduled over the next, wherever. Not a single one of them is ChatGPT. Am I going to start using it? Well, to generate ideas potentially, but my particular spin for our clients has got to be something that's very unique. And I think that having some sort of good housekeeping seal of approval is one of the strategies that organizations can use to differentiate themselves. I think one of the big challenges for many businesses is the challenge of disintermediation. So, for example, let's just say you're an ad agency that specializes in writing copy for clients. Maybe it's financial management discussion and analysis for financial statements. Maybe it's blog posts. Maybe it's, I don't know, white papers, whatever it happens to be. And that's your business, coming up with this content. Well, what happens when your clients realize that they can actually do maybe 75% of it themselves? Or they expect that you're going to use these kinds of tools in your business, and therefore the fees that they're paying, that you're paying them, I should say, should be downsized quite dramatically as well. Almost every business has got an angle that you can say, can we dramatically reduce our costs, or might somebody dramatically reduce their costs by disintermediating us out of the equation completely?
Since AI is new, and realistically, none of my current team is trained on AI, how can they participate in innovating ways to use AI in our company? It's new for everybody.
Well, I think part of the issue is what I just growing what I said before. Controlled experiments. I think that allowing some people to experiment and say, well, how can we use this is part of the challenge. I think also, you just do a search for AI on Google or teaching or learning AI on Google, you'll find all kinds of stuff. Some of it is fed by a fire hose. Some of it is so out of date because it changes so rapidly. Some of it is garbage, right? And some of it's actually really good. So you can actually say to people, please spin lots of cycles doing that kind of thing. For our part, we came up with something called an AI resource kit to sort of fast forward that. And we could talk about that later if you like, Rania. But I think that's kind of how I would approach that question. I'll just add one other thing. If you start with something tactical and specific to demonstrate that, in fact, this can be helpful, that can help socialize the idea amongst people who are very concerned about whether we should be using it or not.
When a product is free, as we know, the user, and that's us, is the product. How are we, the product in this case, being used, and who is benefiting from or monetizing our use of the AI platform?
So the Washington Post, a number of months ago, did this big analysis with respect to actually just that. So every time we actually, all of our websites, for example, all the content gets sort of gobbled in there. All of the prompts that we actually type in is used for future training in these systems. Now, a big caveat here. If you're paying for some of these systems, some of them will explicitly say, no, the prompts that you're actually typing in are not being used. If you've got a private AI and you're paying, the fee for that, and usually this is like at enterprise level, no, the data that you put in there in your prompts is not being used for training data. But this is actually just a huge thing. You get nothing for free. So if you're using ChatGPT 3.5, which is free, what do you expect? Of course, they're gonna use the stuff that you type in as training data for future. But if you're paying for it, and if there's something that is turned off in terms of no, we're not using it, then you're probably okay. And this is, I guess, one of the big risks. It's not just a question of who's benefiting, monetizing. Back to Washington Post. I was actually shocked to find out that on my website, what they did, I guess, is they did this huge analysis of the data set that is being used, not by ChatGPT, but by some of the other ones. Google and others make these things available so that they can be used for training, etc. And what the large language models do is they tokenize the data they have. They take the information and they make what's called tokens out of it. And so the question of gee, how many tokens has your website have you provided to the big Borg, if you will, is something that's interesting. Well, to my utter horror, out of all the websites in the world that were sucked into this, the many terabytes and petabytes, mine was number 80,000. It was the 80,000th on the list. There's millions of websites. I'm number 80,000, which means, oh yes, that's great. But on the other hand, it's absolutely scary because supposedly my IP is being used in a way. And for this reason, there's a lot of organizations who've said, no, we're going to use firewalls and other processes to say to their employees, you cannot use these techniques. You cannot use, because we just can't afford our private intellectual property being used inappropriately. Now, of course, the issue is well, that's very good, but people, if they wanted to, they could just use your phone to make the queries and everything. But it's a big issue, when you're the product.
If my human employees can and will make mistakes, and they can behave off-brand from my corporate brand and not, use our brand voice, what is the big problem if AI makes those same mistakes? Both human and machine make mistakes, but a machine doesn't take a salary, require management, and give us a headache.
Okay, that's a good question, and this speaks to one of the challenges with using AI to generate content, and that's the question of brand voice. If you think about how a particular brand or an organization's culture, for example, has changes over the years, and a good example that I absolutely love is our good friend James Bond. In the 1960s, James Bond was kind of a womanizer, a man of the world. He could do no wrong, etc. And then and quite misogynist. And then if you sort of fast forward today, he's very sensitive. He's troubled. He's this. He's that. How did that James Bond voice go from one to the other? And the way that they did it is the writers said, hey, listen, we need to, bit by bit, we change. But when all these tools specifically have got their data set from a specific date, September or this last January, for example, it's based on something that's static. And even if you add lots and lots and lots of helpful stuff within the prompt strategy, it's kind of like jerking from one to the other. There's no brand voice. So back to the question about, hey, listen, if AI says things off brand, well, people are flexible and they're soft, and AI is very specific, right? And when you feed in a prompt today versus when you do it in, say, 8 months from now, the answer will be, for the most part, the same if it's the same prompts, because it's the same data, it's the same algorithms. presumably, if you're using this kind of tool, you've got to be aware of it. So, how do you become aware of it? It's very simple. If you say this is one of the big risks of using AI, and we want to use it because the benefits make sense, you have to put your own guardrails on and ask questions. Does the brand voice make sense? Okay, has there been changes? Is there attribution? There's a whole bunch of these questions. We've got an AI quality assurance checklist that it's also in the resource kit, actually, Ronnie, isn't it?
Sure.
A whole bunch of these very specific questions that you should ask when you have some AI output. By the way, obviously, you're not going to ask all the questions all the time. Things that are higher risk, you ask more questions. Things that are super low risk, you don't ask so many.
But I can summarize quite a lot of the questions having to do with, how do we do policy? How do we do training? How do we, people don't have the experience. And we've put together what we're calling the AI starter kit, the resource kit. Randall, did you want to share about that?
Yeah, I can. Like I said, AI is very new, but it's not new, right? What's new about it is it's a shiny new object. What's not new about it is the issues have been solved before. So, for example, way back when the internet came out, there was something called an acceptable internet use policy that most organizations put together. And here's the policy, and here it is for all the people, and that's good. Then social media came about, and every organization came out, for example, with an acceptable use policy for their employees using social media, and then that came out. Why don't we have the same thing for AI? We should. Okay, not a 30-page policy manual, but one page that we can actually give to the employees, or think about ourselves and be a little bit better. What's the base training that everybody should have? What are the risks that are inherent, and how do we mitigate against them? What is that a prompt strategy that isn't 30 pages, but isn't like 2 or 3 dumb questions either? So what we've done is we've put together what we call the AI resource kit, and I could just bring up the wonderful BRAINTRUST page that actually has it. There we go. And it has all those things in it. And if people are interested, by the way, the reason why we came up with this was because it was getting very tiring answering the same questions over and over and over. And if people are interested in this, we could put a link in the chat and everything. And this is a friends and family pop-up. So there's a coupon code that'll let you have it for half the price if that's what you're interested in. But it's specifically, where do we start with AI, and what are the risks, and how do we manage them, and how do we improve the output, and if we actually go into it, there's here, for example, is a list of all the different types of AI risks for organizations, and then there's a whole bunch of things that are in here that people can use to do. So, Rania, is there anything else that you want to share about this just before we take some more questions?
Yes, we have our usual courses on our BRAINTRUST site. And we put this one together really as a resource kit, as a toolkit, as a starter kit. It's structured as a course, which is sort of fun in terms of you pacing, how much you can take in and how much you can roll out at your organization. So it's structured like with the workbook and activities for everything that you're going to overlay onto what you're already doing. So things like an AI use policy, if you don't have one, we're sharing ours. Training, how to do training, we're going to share our strategy for it. Our toolkit also comes with an hour one-on-one with Randall, which is a very big gift Randall's giving the community here. And you can talk specifically, particularly once you roll all this stuff out and see how things are going with AI use at your organization, you can take that hour with Randall. But yeah, it's a great opportunity to, I think so, to roll that out.
Trust me, we do not get rich by people buying courses at 50% off. That's not our business. That's not my business. Okay, but if people are interested in it, you're welcome to have it. This is what we have for our clients.
We've seen in the past companies filter out time-wasting sites like Facebook or other social media sites. Do you see a scenario where ChatGPT will be blacklisted on company computers?
AI is like water. It gets on everything. It's like electricity. It powers it's going to be powering everything. So it's going to be built into the tools that people actually use, as opposed to like a tack-on site that one has to go to in order to access it. So that's the first half of the question. The second half of the question is, yes, there are companies, actually a surprising number of them, that are actually filtering out this and adding policy that says, we do not want our employees using it for the following reasons, typically IP protection. That being said, okay, this is a game of whack-a-mole, and I just don't see how this is possibly sustainable. I suspect that'll sort of change as companies start to either build in private AI tools, okay, i.e. their own version of ChatGPT, and as some of the big platforms, and they already realize this, that there's an interesting business just by opening up their APIs, their programming interfaces, so that people can access the engine and the data set, but layer their data on top of that before anybody actually starts with the prompts themselves.
In a good question here, in the spirit of privacy and protecting your IP, how expensive or involved would it be to develop my own proprietary generative AI system to load up with content from within my field, or I can add my own IP without fear of sharing it widely? And would you suggest this?
So in the category of being a cowboy or scout, there's all kinds of ways to explore and everything, and whether this is the best way of doing it. There's products out there right now that claim to do it for $75 a month, up to $1,800 a month plus. There's lots of code snippets that you can use and sort of create your own front end by glomming on to ChatGPT or the other ones that have got an API programming interface. Excuse me. So yeah, I guess I guess you absolutely can do this if you want, but the question is why. And so the way I would answer that why question is this. If, for example, your business is looking to fundamentally change its business model, and your business is thinking about how might we do such and such, being able to use some of these cheaper tools as a way to demonstrate proof of concept and do some market testing, either as a controlled beta or in some sort of market research mechanism, that's not a bad way to test it out, to build some learning, etc. But wholesale building your own platform, boy, there's a lot of money chasing that right now, and there's a lot of people who are kind of ahead of the game. So whether you can catch up to them or whether you've got something very, very narrow, where it's not a question of building your own AI, but rather embedding existing tools into what you're doing now, that I would say is a bit more prudent.
A practical question. How will AI be used for hiring and recruiting? Can it help us find better candidates, for instance?
Yeah, so we've already seen video interviews where people record their responses to an interview. The next step is really AI-created questions, AI-driven conversations, and AI-driven screening based on the candidate response. So yeah, the challenge with this is that there's a huge risk that bias that is baked right into the AI will result in diverse candidates being screened out, even if they're the better candidate. But I guess getting closer today, there are many things. Candidates whose resumes are written with ChatGPT and contain hallucinations. On the recruitment side, AI can help summarize resumes and select those that meet more fuzzy screening criteria than the current applicant tracking systems. So yeah, without a question, it's there now. It's going to be bigger, but the question of hallucinations and the importance of reference checks and so on, will become even more important.
So if we had an AI use policy, which, as you said, we're sharing in the resource kit, our own, how would one enforce that? Like, how much headspace and manpower would be needed for that?
So this is no different than any other kind of policy that's kind of a live policy rather than one that sits in the book. Number one is a question of training, okay, but not training. This is the policy. So all the financial institutions do anti-money laundering training, okay, and you've got to tick off all these boxes and everything. But I think for the AI-based training, like some of the other acceptable use policies before. And the training has to focus on helping people understand why the actual restrictions and policies are there in the first place. It's impossible to say, here are the 1,000 things you can't do. It's got to be principles based. So number one is the training and the particular type of training that's necessary. The second thing is putting in technical guardrails, for example, firewalls and so on, so that some of the most egregious uses are not actually done. Okay, it's a bit of a moving target in terms of what you're filtering for and everything, but that's part of the solution. The third is the whole question of compliance and monitoring. Is if there's no compliance and monitoring, then the policy is useless. So, for example, if you've got a policy that says you really shouldn't do this because of risk of hallucinations or IP protection or whatever it is, then you've got a particular manager who says, you got to do this fast. You got to do this fast. Where's the output? And there's this sort of contract. No. There's got to be alignment, right? And it's got to be throughout the organization, right? And a little bit of an audit from time to time doesn't hurt as well, just to test. That's the only way you could do it. I also think that, unlike some policies that might end up in a book and never ever change, I think because the whole world of AI is changing so rapidly, the question of saying, what's the update cycle of the training, of the policy itself and the training, and obviously the monitoring compliance at the same time. I just wanted to personally say thank you, everybody, for showing up. I hope that it got you thinking in a slightly different way, or at least open up questions.